Hello. Hello, hello. This is always the interesting part where you make some loose conversation while you're waiting for the platforms to put the live stream out there. So good evening if you are joining us live. Welcome to 55 at Phoenix. I will explain more in just a second as to what's going on. You'll see that I'm joined by my guest this evening. I will introduce him shortly too. Let's just check we are live. We are out there. It's all looking good. Okay. Hello and welcome to 55 at Phoenix. I'm Zoe from Phoenix Life and Wellbeing Coaching, and I'm joined this evening by Charlie. Charlie's going to introduce himself in just a second, but you're joining us for the next 45 minutes or so. We are recording this live. Charlie has 5 questions on the topic of physical health, and I have not seen Charlie's questions, so I know what the topic is. But I have not yet seen the questions. So what follows over the next 45 minutes or so is completely unscripted, completely unplanned, unprepared, certainly on my part. But I know Charlie's put some preparation into his questions. But we're going to be talking about physical health and hopefully lots of information there that's helpful to those of you tuning in, listening in, watching. So thank you very much for joining us. So, as I said, my guest this evening is Charlie Beestone, who is a food mindset coach. Charlie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I will try. I'm always really bad at this.
This is always the worst bit, isn't it? The intro
isn't it?
bit is the worst bit. We just want to get straight into the conversation, but people need to know who you are and what you do. So tell us a little bit.
So I am a nutritionist by trade. My background is in performance nutrition, so sports nutrition mainly. I now work more with people in terms of health, weight loss, performance, their relationship with food and their mindset around food, which are normally the limiting factors. I always say to people the nutrition bit is easy. The actual behaviors around it is the hard bit. Yeah. So that's most of my work. I also am a performance coach. So I work a lot in sort of corporate wellness and performance. So using food and other lifestyle things to actually help people perform better and see themselves as knowledge athletes, which is a term which I'm not sure if I like or not, but a lot of people use that. So that's basically me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for joining me this evening. We've been connected on social media for quite some time, but this is actually the first time we have spoken. So although we have lots in common in terms of some of the work that we do, this is actually the first time we've met. So really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to join me. So I am intrigued as to what questions you've come up with on the topic or loosely connected to the topic of physical health. Should we just get straight into it?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Let's do this.
Cool. So the first question is a question I've been thinking about a lot over the past few months. And it is, do you think physical health can be a standalone value? Or do you think that it's more important to have other values and then understand that being physically healthy allows you to give your best to that other value?
What a great first question. Do you know, interestingly, values is something that I work with a lot of clients, and actually it's quite often one of the things that we look at initially. So a lot of coaches use the wheel of life to look at what areas people want to work on. And I quite often tend to look at values and needs, because everything that we do kind of centers around our values, our principles, the standards that we live by, but also the needs as well, those fundamental needs. So not just what we want, but the actual needs. And physical health is listed across both of those and does come up a lot for people. So I don't tend to go with a standalone value in terms of just getting them to narrow down to one. I have a hard enough time, and anybody who's watching this, who's worked with me and done the exercise with me, knows that even just trying to get it down to 3 or 3 to 5 kind of core principle values is a challenge in itself. But physical health tends to come up quite a lot, but I think it's one that's debated a bit like family. You know, sometimes people are like, oh, I haven't put family down and I'm a parent. Is that really bad? But when you look at their other values, or the values that they do pick, quite often what that represents is what family means to them. So things like loyalty or support, and actually when they describe what's important to them about their family or it is their other values have been described. So I think to answer your question, I think physical health, if it's not named, quite often it comes through in why physical health is important, because it enables one of the other values, or it's a kind of a support to one of the other values. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's the way I look at it as well. I think that was sort of the conclusion I came to, and that when I work with clients on values, which I don't think a lot of nutritionists do, but obviously I understand in the same way you do how important it is to find out where food is in your sort of hierarchy in life in terms of priorities. And I try and dissuade people from saying that health is a value, because I think it's more important for them to outline the other things, like what health gives them.
Yeah.
And often when people say I want to change, and you say why, and they say I want to be healthy, that's not like, it's very rarely enough to change.
No. And if that was the case, people wouldn't put health on the back burner when life gets stressful, which is what people do. And let's be honest, I include myself in that sometimes. I think over the years, I've learned that actually the nutrition, sleep and rest, and activity, they're the three things that actually we can control even when life is stressful. They are the three things that we can have more control over, but they are often the things that people put on the back burner when they feel overwhelmed and when they feel stressed, even though they also know that they're the things that will actually help them to deal with the stress and the overwhelm. So I think if physical health was at the top or in their hierarchy of values, that wouldn't necessarily happen, because they would put that above everything else. But most people don't tend to do that. They tend to put the other things above it, which is why it drops down that priority list, understandably. But yeah, absolutely. That's why, and I think it is important. And I think that's why certainly what caught my eye with your social media presence is that it's so much more than eat this, don't eat that, move more, eat less, all of the standard stuff that you hear saying, because you talk about values, because you talk about priorities, because you talk about those habits. That to me is what kind of caught my eye in terms of how you work with people. So yeah, it's a really interesting first question, because that's, that is the reason, well, one of the reasons of why you caught my eye on social media, is because you go into that. So yeah, it's interesting that would be your first question too.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad. I think it's one of those things where people know all of those things. And I'll often say to people, why do you think actually that you are struggling with, like, weight management, for example? I eat too much, I don't move enough. And if the answer was, calorie deficit, a lot of people would be fine. Yeah. And you probably get this a lot, in that people say, I know what I need to do, I just don't do it. Yeah. And like, we know that a lot of the time we sort of try and deal with people struggling to change behavior by throwing information at them. And if information was the barrier, it wouldn't be an issue for people, because we have enough information, but people don't change. I think the example I always like to give is quitting smoking. So smoking doesn't make sense really as a health behavior. Yeah. And if you say, well, actually, we all know that smoking is bad for us, and we've had so much information thrown at us, and it doesn't seem to change people's behavior. If you understand why someone smokes, then you can help them change their behavior. So if you say, why do you smoke? And someone says, it's the only 10 minutes I get outside of work or away from the kids, or it actually really helps me de-stress or relax, or whatever their reason is, you can look at interventions that actually help them change that. Yeah. But if you just say, absolutely, it's bad for you, you should stop. Funny enough, no one stops.
Makes no difference. And as an ex-smoker myself, I can completely relate. Yeah, you have to go back to the reasons of what is the need that habit is meeting. And if you can work that out, then you can start to look at the options that will help to replace that habit with something that is more in line with their values and more in line with what they want. So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's very rarely information, it's very rarely knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great first question.
Thank you. Should we move on to my second one?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so I mean, this one's probably partly selfish, because I'm quite bad at this. So knowing our values can feel big picture and sort of long term almost, or both. How do you bring them into your awareness on a daily basis to ensure that all of your like micro actions on a day-to-day basis are aligned with the things you value, which I guess includes physical health?
How do I personally, or how do I?
Yeah, so you personally, and also with people you work with.
Well, mine are right in my line of sight. So the last time I tried to pull it out, it had some dust on it, and it was a little bit embarrassing. So I was like, just dust off my values. Mine is right there, and you know, I know that I'm fortunate enough running my own business that I get to pick the values for my business will be in line with my personal values, and so mine are making a difference, positivity, and continuous improvement. So for me, originally when I put the list together, I had achievement as one of my values, but I found quite quickly that actually it's not that success at the end of it that is important to me. It's the progress and the journey along the way, and especially with clients that I work with. Quite often, what success looks like or what they're trying to achieve changes as they move forwards, as they kind of understand themselves a little bit more. Things change, and I found that actually not just for clients but also on a personal level as well, it's very rarely about the achievement at the end of it. It's about, I have to feel that I am continuously improving. So, you know, things like training, things like, am I showing up in the same way, but am I learning as I go? All of those things are really important to me. So for me, they're in my line of sight. And one of the activities that I do with clients to help that is to look at a values triangle. So the reason why I put some pressure on people to get it down to 3 is so that they can put it into a triangle, and then to put the challenge, if you like, in the center of the triangle and almost move it around with those values to check which one is out of alignment. Because ideally you want it right in the middle of that triangle. Then you know all 3 values are lined up nicely. But if something's feeling off kilter, I think quite often when somebody's got a challenge, they'll look at the pros, they look at the cons, they look at the benefits, they look at the risks, they look at the very sort of logical ways of trying to approach a challenge. Whereas looking at it in terms of, is it alignment with your values, is a much more kind of emotional way of, okay, why does this feel off? You know, what is it that's out of sync here? So the values triangle can really help with that. But I think if you speak to people that I've worked with, I know some people have got it on post-it notes next to their next to their desktops. I've got other people that have got it as a saver on their, screensaver on their phone. And a lot of people, it is just about that practice of adding it to those questions of, okay, this feels icky, or this feels off, or this is uncomfortable. What is going on here? To add that question of, okay, where do my values fit into this? Because quite often that is the missing piece or the missing question that people don't tend to ask. So I think it's just, again, it's practice, isn't it? It's practice and habit. Just bringing that extra question in to ask themselves when things aren't quite right for them, to add values into the mix and get into the habit of asking and adding values into the mix.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's tempting to think there's something more complicated than that. And I think that's where I get stuck.
This is the thing, isn't it? And I, there's so often, people say to me, it's like, oh, it's so simple when you say it like that. Very rarely is anything of being human actually that complicated. We make it complicated because then it's it's almost like a good excuse then, isn't it? Oh, let's just far too complicated. But it's like, is it that complicated when you break it right down to what's going on underneath all of these layers that you've added in on top that make it complicated? When you bring it back down to that, what's at the core, what is it that's creating the problem, or what is it that's creating the challenge, or creating the behavior, or creating the belief? All of these things, when you really kind of strip it down, it's not that complicated. It is, we are, as humans, we're quite simple creatures, really. So sometimes I think that's the thing for me, is just kind of breaking it down and helping make it nice and easy, so that it's easy then for people to do something about it, which is probably a lot of what you do too.
Yeah, it's just awareness, isn't it? I think the hardest question I ever get as a nutritionist is, how can I drink more water? And I'm sort of like, the answer is drink more water. Like, it's a very difficult question to answer. And the reality is that if you don't have it in front of your face, you probably won't remember to do it.
Yeah.
And that's the same with a lot of things, isn't it?
Yeah, if you want to do less of it, put obstacles in the way. If you want to do more of it, take the obstacles away. Again, it's simple, isn't it? Or just have the water in front of you so that it's there. And if you don't want, if you want to do less of it, you move it out of sight put it in a different place. If you say, for example, everyone's got a snack cupboard, haven't they? We've all got a snack cupboard.
Oh yeah.
Some of us might have more than one snack cupboard, but if you're in that kind of habit of going to the snack cupboard, change the snack cupboard, put it somewhere different, kind of disrupt that pattern of thought, disrupt that pattern of behavior. It sounds like we're undermining the work that we do and the studying that we've done and all of the things that we've learned. But yeah, it is. The actual concept itself is quite simple. Applying it and helping people to work it through doesn't feel simple.
No.
For them.
Very true.
Or sometimes for us too, I guess.
Oh, all the time. Yeah. No, it's about sort of that cue, response, reward, isn't it? And you just change one of them. Yeah. And that's how you form habits.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
Does that help you with bringing it into your work? Because you're a similar situation to me, aren't you? But like running your own business, so you get to align your values personally and professionally. Does it tie in with that for you?
Yeah, I think so. I'm similar to you in that my values personally and in my business are exactly the same. I don't think they change that much. I think making business decisions that align is harder than personal decisions for me. So there's a classic of, I could take this work, it's going to take me away from other work, but turning down money is difficult. Even if it aligns with your values, that's a difficult thing to do. So there are times where it's more challenging than others. But I think for me, it's probably that smaller decisions, I'm less likely to bring my values into it. Whereas big decisions, I think, like you said, I'm well practiced at that now.
Yeah.
I spent so much time when I was working full time before I went self-employed, mulling over should I leave or not, that I use my values quite a lot over a month, 2 months.
Yeah.
So that's easy. But then doing it on a sort of day-to-day basis of, I mean, the same things everyone struggles with. I don't want to go to the gym. Should I go to the gym? Well, yes, I should. What would your value suggest you do? Should I come off of social media for a bit and read a book? Yes, of course you should. Things like that. Like that's where I and a lot of other people, I imagine, struggle more. I think big decisions, it's a bit easier for me.
Yeah, but this is reflective of a lot of things, isn't it? The big picture stuff is we are more conscious of. It's the daily habits, the daily small decisions that we tend to be less conscious of, which is why it's so easy to slip into the old patterns of thinking and behaving, because we're less conscious of them, because we do it all the time. And especially if we've done it all the time for a long time, it takes that little bit longer, but it is about disrupting it, isn't it? Of thinking of it like it is a bigger decision and being more aware of it and a more considered approach.
Yeah, and I guess that's what values do, is allow you to make it a bigger decision, because all of our health behaviors on a day-to-day basis have zero consequences, as opposed to like a big job decision has big consequences. So you take time. Whether I go to the gym or not on one day has no consequences whatsoever. There's almost, without being ridiculous, there's nothing that I could decide to do tomorrow that will have a meaningful impact either way on my health. But obviously those compound over time and then they become important. But that one individual decision doesn't. And that's where it becomes difficult. You can say, well, actually, I can skip it. Nothing bad will happen. And you have to remind yourself, actually, but if I keep doing that, something bad will happen.
And then it's a lot harder to undo it and kind of fix it. I don't like the word fix, but it's a lot harder to make that change, isn't it? So it's much easier to make that one small decision today than it is to let that build up and then have to make a bigger decision further on down the line. That's the way I try and see it. Is like I'm saving myself trouble if I just go and get it done now. I'm saving myself the trouble of having to approach something a lot bigger further down the line. Lazy.
It's nice evidence, isn't it? Like we've basically like discussed a lot of sort of James Clear type thinking of atomic habits, but if you can do something, if you give yourself evidence that you are the sort of person that does that, and therefore it becomes something that you do like automatically rather than having to think about it.
I'm also just really stubborn. So if I've said I was going to do it, it's going to get done. And that's the conversation that goes on in my own head, let alone with other people. So the stubbornness becomes a positive in that circumstance. not
I
in
like
others.
it becomes a positive. Yeah, exactly, because it's not always.
Yeah. Oh God, no.
That's nice. Right? As an aside, I always think people think of personality traits as good or bad, rather than seeing that. I don't think there are many that aren't both.
No, I would argue that every trait, every characteristic, every attribute, whichever word you want to use to describe it, it's when it's in balance, it's a positive. If it's underdone or overdone, it becomes a negative.
Yeah.
So my
negative
stubbornness
and positive in different areas.
Yeah. So my stubbornness is at core, in balance, is drive, determination, whichever one you want to pick. For me, it's probably determination. So when it's in balance, it's a positive. If it's overdone, either overdone in terms of how it's showing up or overdone for the situation that I'm in, it becomes negative. If it's underdone, also negative. So it's a lot of the conversations that I have with people is, okay, do you need to turn it up one, or do you need to turn it down one to bring it into balance and make it a positive again? Because there's most people's, I'm this or I'm that. I'm like, okay, but what do you need to adjust to make that a positive for you?
Yeah. And sometimes it needs turning up at work, but not at home. It needs turned down at home.
Yeah.
So like CEO can be cold and unemotional and actually will be better for it, but then might struggle with relationships outside of work. So yes, Cool. Question 3.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so these are all really long. I realised I typed out essays for each one. I listened to some other of these earlier, and everyone was just like really one-line questions, and I was like, yeah, I've got a short essay for you. So the next novella. So it's not uncommon for our values around health and physical health to differ from friends and family and the other people around us. What advice would you give for someone who wants to prioritise their physical health but might not get the support from friends and family?
That's a tough one, isn't it? Especially if you're looking at your own behaviour changes that have been accommodated by people around you or fit in, that actually your behaviour change is going to have an impact on other people. That can be really, really difficult for people, because most people will say, don't they, if they're trying to make a change, they want accountability and they want support. It's not just about them and how they show up. And one of the things that I ask people, especially when we're talking about goals, is to think about their internal resources. So what is it you know about you, your character, your attributes, but also your skills, your experience, all of the things that you have going into this. What do you know that you bring to the table, if you like, and that's going to help you to achieve success? Because when you've worked that out, then you can work out where your gaps are to know what external resources you need to be able to do that. And friends and family or a coach or a support group all become part of that, because dependent on your support network at home, sometimes people like to separate the two, don't they? They want a partner to still be a partner, but actually they want somebody else to do the more, because nobody likes to be challenged by their partner, do they? Let's face it, like we will quite happily take criticism and challenge from somebody else, but we don't necessarily want it from people at home. So it's about finding that, knowing what support you need, and then who is best placed to be able to do that. But I think changing behaviors, changing your lifestyle is really difficult for people around you. And I know when I started on my health journey, so that was 2010, so it was some time ago, I lost friends in the process because I didn't want to go out as much. I was trying to make different decisions, and I know that on reflection I was quite extreme, and that's what put me on this journey. So I was very extreme in how I approached it, but it did mean that it was a challenge for other people. And people approach things in the way that they feel is what they know at the time, and I think I didn't know at the time either, so I played a massive part in that. I actually lacked the knowledge. When we talked earlier about most people don't lack the knowledge, I did lack the knowledge, and I made decisions that ultimately resulted me in having poor health to this day, because I thought I was losing weight in a way that was okay, and actually wasn't, and long-term damage was created. And that's what put me on this path of studying nutrition, looking to be a nutrition coach, and then realizing it's not just about telling people what to eat. You need to expand those coaching skills to be able to really support people, and it kind of took off from there. So all's well that ends well to a point, but actually for me to make those changes, I did need the support from people around me, because you don't want to feel like you're going on things alone. So I think the values do come into it. I think understanding why it's important to you helps you to be able to have those conversations with the people around you and say, this is really important to me because, and helping people to see where it is you're trying to get to. But people fear change, even positive change. People fear how that impacts them, because we're selfish people. We don't like to think we are, but the first question is, well, how does that impact me? So you want to go on a diet? Well, can we still go out to eat? It's like, can we still do this? Like, how does that impact me? If you become a complete health freak, which was what a lot of people described me as, is like, oh, you've become this health freak, you don't do fun stuff anymore. And it's like, I'm finding new fun stuff. It might not be fun to you, but it's fun to me. So people worry about being left behind, don't they? When somebody else is changing, they worry about being left behind, or it presses a button for them. It triggers conversations that maybe they see you doing something that they haven't been able to do, and sometimes it suits people for you to stay in the status quo. It works for them for you to not change and to live the way that you're living, but you can't. I talk to people about people being like anchors. They hold you in the harbor, and it's good for them, but it's not what you're there to do. It's not what you want. It's not important to you. So I think from a values perspective, the needs perspective of being really clear. I mean, as well as I do, when you sit down and write those goals, you as an individual need to be really clear why you're doing this, not just for yourself, but to be able to communicate that to the people around you. And I think also the other thing I would say is really important is to be really clear what you need from them. Be really specific about it, because I think people want to support. They don't always know how. So when you know what support you need from different people, clearly communicate that and say, like, this is really important to me because X, Y, Z. I would love you to support me on this, and it would be really helpful if you could X, Y, Z. But be really specific about what it is that you do want. Otherwise, people fumble around with all of the things they think you might want, and just cut to the chase and let them know, because that's what most people find more helpful than not.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think I really agree that sometimes it's almost like holding your mirror up to that person when they hear about you, and then they look at it and go, that's something you always struggled with. Do you really want to see them succeed with that? And it is selfish, but it is human nature that we do that. And a lot of it is people projecting their stuff on you.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't want you to achieve that.
Yeah. It's very rarely about us.
Yeah, exactly.
Very rarely about us.
Yeah. And sometimes I think we often think that the person has an issue with it when they don't. And I always say to people, like, it's arrogant of us to assume that they're thinking about us, and they're not. Like, we can do what we want. And again, it's sort of like, if I can convince myself that I can't do it because they don't want me to, that's easier than facing actually trying it and finding it really hard.
Yeah. One of my favorite coaching questions is, what assumption are you making there?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we see everything through our own world viewpoint. That doesn't mean everybody else sees it that way. So it is really easy to make an assumption of that's what people are thinking. I knew they were thinking that. I know that's what they were thinking. It's like, but did you? What assumption are you making there? And how do you know if that is true, or is that something that is your perception that could be very different to the conversation that's going on in the other person's head? So yeah, great. Long questions are good. I've got a post-it, this confession here. I have a post-it that says, don't stack questions, stay out of their space, because I have a tendency to do the same thing. So I ask a question and then I extend the question. And so I have a reminder there. So confession to say, don't stack questions, ask the question, stay out of their space.
Yeah. No, I'm awful for it as well. Really bad. Really bad. I need that reminder. It's just like people say things and you're like, that's brilliant. Should we go down that tangent? Let's go down that rabbit hole as well. And then you end up an hour and a half later and you've not spoke about anything you wanted to speak about.
So hard.
Yeah. Okay. Question 4. How do you find the balance between knowing our values and making decisions that align with the things that matter to us? And then on the other side, encouraging trying new things, exploration, curiosity, all the things that we know are actually good for us as well.
That's a good question. Do they need to be separate?
Possibly not, but they've got potential to be conflicting.
And actually, that word conflicting has kind of triggered for me. That's quite often what happens is people's own values conflict with each other. So one of the most common things is people like to be kind, but they like to be honest. And sometimes being honest is not necessarily the kindness that we want to show in the way that we want to show it. But I think you can be honest and be kind. But that's two values that quite often conflict. So I think if you were a client coming to me to say that they were maybe not trying something because it doesn't align with their values, is to really explore that thought process, that belief of why it's out of alignment with their values. Maybe it doesn't fit in the truest form, but is there a way that it does fit in a different way that perhaps they've not seen? Or maybe what exploring something different, almost like a detour, isn't it? Is that it might take you out of alignment and off on a different path, but brings you back on the path in a much stronger way, that it adds value, even if it's out of alignment, which I think is kind of picks up on what you were saying about the business decisions, isn't it? Of, okay, so it's going to pay well, but it's going to divert me away from the things so it's that profit over passion, purpose, isn't it? That actually sometimes a divert off that adds profit means that you can come back in and add purpose for something that you're passionate about. So I think sometimes it feels like a bit of a detour, but if you know that, if you know where you're going, you know whether or not it's a small diversion that brings you back on path, or whether it's a diversion heading off to nowhere. So I think it is being really, if you are really clear about where it is you're going, then you can see whether or not it is actually part of the journey still, even though it's a little bit of a detour.
Yeah. And I think the nice thing is sometimes moments like that can prompt you to reappraise your values, because they're not set forever. They do change, and mine certainly changed over the past 5 years. So I guess another question, which isn't my last question, is how often would you personally sort of reappraise values, look at your values again?
I do mine every year, but it's really difficult because I've had 3 very similar ones for such a long time that it's quite hard to go in blind, because you've almost got that preconceived notion of, but these have worked really well for me, and actually these are really important. So I tend to have like an annual me reflection of kind of just thinking about, where am I going? Am I living the life that I said 12 months ago I wanted to live? Am I making decisions that line up with that? Am I showing up each day in a way that I'm comfortable with, happy with? It's that kind of legacy side of it, because I think it's so easy, isn't it, to kind of slip into a routine, and just, I think especially when you're in an industry like ours, where actually the way we show up can have a significant impact on the people who are trusting us to be part of their journey. You can't take that lightly. You can't take that lightly. Let's just leave that there. You can't take that lightly. I don't take that lightly. People trust, and they share very personal information. They share things that are really important to them, and they trust you to have their interests, their best interests at heart. Even though as a coach you're not influencing that, you're giving them that space to do that. You're not bought into the outcome, but you are bought in that they make decisions that are the best decisions for them. And you can't take that lightly. And so how I show up on a daily basis, we're talking about those kind of, again, the atomic habits, aren't they? Every time I show up with a client, if I don't show up in the best possible way, it has an impact. And over time, it can be really easy to kind of just take your eye off the ball a little bit. So I have an annual check-in for lots of things that I check in with. But also, if I've had a bit of a stumbling block, if you like, that's kind of, as these things do, give you a little bit of a knock, is sometimes then it's just a case of, okay, let's just use this as an opportunity to kind of sit in it and kind of work out, what does this mean? What did I do or what part did I play that has created this situation? What do I need to do differently? And what does this mean? Because that's where the learning is. And, people don't like to be uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is needed. So uncomfortable is not necessarily a negative. Sometimes the uncomfortable is a positive, and we can't avoid that and try and move out of it too quickly, because it's really important to check in with that. So that's a very long answer to quite possibly the shortest question you've asked. But I do check in annually as a matter of routine, but I also check in when shit happens.
Yeah, no, I'm the same, to be honest. And I'm glad you have loads of stuff you do every year. Like, I have a full, over Christmas, like full review, like proper autopsy of what's happened, and then big plan of what's going to happen. Something I spoke to someone about a few months ago, actually, which I really liked and took on, was they give themselves a word, like, for an intention for the year.
Yeah.
Which I really like, and I've added that. So mine this year was discomfort, because I know that that's something I avoid, and actually when I lean into it, I generally do better work, and that generally means that I live my values more. So I try to get better at saying, why aren't you doing this? Or you said you were going to do this and you haven't. Why not? Probably because it's uncomfortable. That's probably a sign you should do that then. And then think, how am I actually going to do it? So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I can't remember what I had a word this year. I can't remember what it was. I'm looking at my walls that I've got so much all over them now. It's not up there. Sometimes I have a word of the week as well. So I have an accountability partner that I check in with. And sometimes in conversation while we're checking, it's like, it looks like the word for this week is, or an analogy. I mean, I love analogies and metaphors, because I think sometimes it's really hard to put into words how you feel. But also, from my point of view as a coach, it's sometimes very hard to try and understand how people feel. But if they give you an analogy or a metaphor, it's like, okay, I know how that feels. So now I can kind of empathize with where you're at. But I do love words and metaphors. But yeah, I don't know what I think it was, I know my word for next year is simplicity.
Because that's one of my values.
Because I had that conversation in the last couple of weeks when I went off and did some planning. Next year it's about keeping it simple. So yeah, I can't actually remember what my word was. I'm surprised. It's got to be on a post-it note somewhere, but I should be more, I could be more aware of what that word is, which means I've lost. Yeah, wonder what it was. Can't have been that important or relevant. Something obviously changed. There we go.
You've already done it. We're 9 months in and you've already ticked that off. So
that's what it was. Yeah.
Okay, last question, which might be the longest, but it's not the most difficult, I don't think.
Okay.
I might be wrong. So we are often held back in pursuing like better physical health by our own limiting beliefs. So who we are as individuals, what we can or can't do, the labels that we give ourselves of the type of people that we are. What can we do to remove those beliefs or relearn a different way of looking at changing our behavior?
Ooh, great final question. And it is, isn't it? It is all about, but it is all about the beliefs. And I think physical health is a really good example of people try to change the behavior or the response, and they'll work on what can I do differently? and they don't work on the belief that sits in behind it that drives that behavior. So I will constantly keep going back to people to say, okay, what's the belief that drives that behavior? And what belief do you want to have or want to hold that's going to drive the behavior that you're looking for? Because, and I'm sure that people come to you to say, and they'll want almost like a list of, these are the things that I need to do to have the outcome that I'm looking for, or they want to change how they respond, especially emotional responses, how they want to respond to things. But if you don't explore the belief that sits in behind it, you're putting all of your energy into trying to change a response, but you're not changing the bit that drives the response. So I think that's the really important bit, is what is the belief that drives the behavior? Call it out, name and shame it, and say, this is when I hear myself thinking this. And we don't always consciously think it either. So that's what we have to be really aware of, is when we notice that behavior, what is the belief that sits in behind it that's driving that behavior? And what do we want to believe that's going to drive the behavior or the response that we want? Because if you can work on the belief, and that feels a lot easier than trying to force the willpower of trying to change a behavior. But it almost feels a bit backwards, doesn't it? But it's kind of getting upstream to fix what's creating the problem, and getting upstream and creating a solution, rather than so the image that pops into my head there is like, the sinking boat and somebody trying to bail out with a very small bucket full of water. It's the belief is plugging the hole where the water's coming in, rather than trying to empty the water out of the boat.
Yeah.
Oh, that was very Bristolian, wasn't it? The water. Emptying the water out of the boat. Caught myself then.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, despite the accent stuff at the end.
A little bit Vicky Pollard. Sneaked in through then.
Yeah, I think what you said about the list is really interesting, that people are very much, I'm really good when I'm on it, and when I'm on it, I do this list of things. And you say, well, actually, the limiting belief is the fact that you think you have to be on it or off it, or that you are this all or nothing person, actually. And until you sort of change that from I'm an all or nothing person to I'm a person that has in the past tended to be all or nothing, you probably won't be that successful actually changing your behaviour.
Yeah. God, if we had £1 for every time we were told that.
Yeah, I'll be retired on an island in private somewhere.
But it's that it's the all or nothing, and so changing the belief to something along the lines of, I'll give 100% every day, but the 100% will look different on different days. So you can be all every day, but the all will look different. We can give it 100%, but what that looks like is going to be different on different days. And I think it is that all or nothing mentality it's an interesting one, isn't it? That's probably another podcast all by itself, because that like I said, if we had £1 for every time somebody said that, and that's a limiting belief in itself, isn't it? It's like, well, I can't do it because I'm on or off. Rather than thinking how you would like to be. And
people come to you with that list thinking maybe there's just one thing that I'm missing from it. And actually, I'm really good. I need to do all these things, and maybe there's something else that I'm not doing. That if I did that, that would be it. I think often the missing piece of the puzzle for a lot of people is it's hard work. Changing behaviour is hard work, and they don't appreciate that. They think they're just one bit, again, information. They're one piece of information away from fixing their problem. And actually, even when you know what the problem is and the sort of limiting belief behind it, it's still really hard work. So I always say to people who spoke about metaphors and analogies, I always say, like with emotional eating, the tools to help people with emotional eating that I use, they're like a sledgehammer for taking down a wall. So using the sledgehammer to take down the wall is easier than breaking a wall down with your hands, but it's still really hard work. So although it's easier and it makes things possible, it doesn't mean that it will be easy. You've still got to do some hard work.
Still got to do the work.
Yeah.
But I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Is that people, and I think especially when people get to the stage where they're looking at getting a coach for support, they've quite often already been putting a lot of energy into trying to make something happen and not seeing any results, or not seeing quick enough results to feel like they're being rewarded for the effort and the energy that they're putting in. And I think that's quite often the initial, and I wonder if it's the same for you, of those initial conversations of really checking in where their energy has been going, what is the effort they've been putting in. And like you said, if they've been trying to chip away a brick wall with a teaspoon, then that's going to take some time. They're going to be expending a lot of energy, a lot of effort. That emotional investment is still there, but the mental, physical involvement that's required to do that is a lot higher. So you want to work smarter. So that's where the coaching, I think, really helps, because ultimately a lot of people that we work with, probably the majority of people that we work with, will probably get there on their own because they have the knowledge. And the knowledge is, certainly the knowledge is, the information is available to them. But it is a teaspoon with the brick wall, whereas they can come and see you and you'll help them with the sledgehammer, which means they've still got to put the work in, they've still got to show up, they've still got to be consistent, but they'll see the results, or they'll certainly feel like there is some momentum and that things are changing. And that's what people need, to feel the change sometimes. Even if they don't see it, they need to feel it. And I think that's one of my checking questions of, okay, what feels different? Because, and I guess especially with your world of measurements and scales and however people choose to record their progress, that question of, okay, what feels different? Because sometimes, and I know for me with my journey with eating well and my relationship with food, was that actually the biggest difference for me was that food and thinking about food stopped being on my mind 24/7. And I used to say and joke that food for me was like Kim's game. If I walked into a room and there was an item of food in the room and you put a blindfold on me 2 seconds after, I could tell you what food was in that room. Like, food consumed like my headspace and thinking and decisions all of the time. Of the time. So for me, when I knew that things were really starting to change, was because it felt different, because things were changing here. Nothing to do with the scales or the measurements or what looked different in the photos. None of that. It was what felt different. And things feel lighter because they're not all consuming, they're not overwhelming, they're not heavy. So sometimes the change is what feels different, not what has actually changed.
And that's the change you should aim for as early as possible for me. Like those sort of keystone habits where if I change this one thing, it gives me the energy to do all the other things I want to do. So like for most people, why they don't succeed with weight loss, for example, is their first change is going to really drop my calories really low. And what that does is gives you no energy. So actually all the other things that are important in terms of exercise or like sleep, movement, stress, etc., they're all much harder because you're really tired. Your first thing you do is sleep 8 hours or drink more water than you were doing. You'll have more energy, and then you'll be able to go and do the step target you've got, or all the other things you want to do. I think having more energy for those things is so important. And also what you said there around, it's working when you've stopped thinking about food. That's always a really nice one. Like food preoccupation is a big thing for a lot of clients.
And it's one of those things that I think, unless it's been a problem for you, it doesn't even cross your mind that you can, you look at workplaces that have a cakes table in the kitchen. If you've got people in your office who are really working on their relationship with food or have a poor relationship with food, you're automatically directing their focus and their headspace, because all they're thinking about in that morning is don't eat the cake, don't eat the cake, don't eat the cake. And then 10 minutes later, I shouldn't have eaten that cake. I'm really annoyed that I ate that cake. Well, now I'm just going to have another piece. And it can spiral really quickly for people. But unless you've ever had that relationship with food, or you work with people that have had that relationship with food, it doesn't even cross people's mind. It's like, oh, there's cake in the kitchen. Like, oh my God, I can tell you every piece, every make, every type of cake that is in that kitchen and how many slices are left, because I'm already mentally counting that if I can just hold out for half an hour, those last 3 slices will be gone and I don't have to make that decision. It's oh God, I'm like completely going back there. But it is all consuming for people. But if you can help people take that away, that you remove that, look how much headspace you've got to focus on things that you want to spend your time thinking about.
One of the things that's hard for those people is for the people around them that don't understand, and will mock them and go, well, I think about food an hour before I want to have my dinner. I think about what I'm going to have for dinner. I'm not preoccupied with food. And that's really frustrating. And again, another analogy. I always say to people, it's the difference between someone coming around your house at a time you knew they were coming for an hour and then leaving, versus someone moving in for 5 days when you didn't know they were going to, and just sleeping on your living room floor. Like, one is absolutely fine and you're okay with it. The other, you're like, what's going on here? And I didn't sign up for this.
What's going on? Or the when you share it and then some, and then the person goes, oh, sometimes I forget to eat. Please leave.
Yeah. Good for you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's so tough. It is really tough. And you know, I think that people want to be supportive. You know, I know we're joking about this. You know, people don't do this with the intention of, you know, making it difficult for people, but you know, it's one of those things. And I think it links back to the question when you were asking about helping people, you know, what you need from people around you. And sometimes it is just that of, actually, you know, can we not put cakes into the kitchen where everybody needs to be? Can we go and put them in a separate room so that they're out of the way for people? Or can we have fruit options that are in the public area and maybe something somewhere else for other people? You know, it is just about helping people to help you. And if you are clear on it yourself, then that helps people to help you a lot quicker and a lot easier.
Yeah, it comes back to what you said about how you can sort of help people in terms of just you don't have to give someone information to help them. You can just be a space for them to tell you what they need, and you sort of reflect it back to them, ask open-ended questions, and try and understand. Because otherwise, you end up doing, even though you're trying to support with things like relationship with food, you end up doing more harm than good. I used to work at Hartbury College and University, which isn't that far from you, and the amount of 16 to 21-year-olds whose relationship with food was significantly worse off because of parents, sadly. And sometimes it was parents trying to do the right thing and saying the things they thought they should be doing, and were actually creating an environment that wasn't necessarily great for the development of a teenager. So yeah, I think sort of understanding what you don't know, not trying to preach to people, and just try and ask them what they need, and then go from there. It's a good start.
It's a great, whether it's food or you know, when you're not quite sure, ask that question. Okay, what can I do to support you? You're not taking the problem away from them. You're not trying to fix it for them. It's still that empowerment for them to have ownership and take responsibility for what they want to do. But it's, okay, what support do you need from me? What can I do? What can I do to support you? What is, you know, give me some things that I can do that's going to help you with this. Just ask the question. There's no prizes for guessing. No.
Yeah, and then you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So shut up and listen to them, and then validate what they think. And don't give people that, oh, you're being silly, oh, that's ridiculous, you're great, or you're fine, or that doesn't help.
Or that you don't look. Please.
Oh, great. Well, I feel better now. It's basically, it's the equivalent of, have you tried not being anxious to anxious people? Oh yeah, well, I am fixed now, thank you.
With the best of intentions, but way off what people actually need. And you know, people don't always need you to problem solve, which is what's nice, is that I'm hearing people talking about this a lot more now, is that okay, give yourself permission to not have to find the solution for the person's problem. And even as coaches, we don't have to find the solution to that person's problem, but what we're doing is we're giving them a space to explore their options, look at the different perspectives, and help themselves to find a solution to their problem, and empower them to take ownership and take responsibility. It's what we do as coaches. We don't have that responsibility. So certainly family and friends don't have that responsibility either. But I think sometimes it's good to remind ourselves that, okay, we don't have to have the answers. Sometimes we just need to sit and give them that space to unravel it as they talk it through.
I often say that to clients. I'll say, I'm going to ask you annoying questions, and I'll say to you, I actually don't know the answer to this, because this is the stuff around your mindset with food, around the people around you, your environment, things like that. I'm just going to ask you a few questions about it, and you'll be able to work out from that yourself So yeah, I'm basically.
Do you get they'll answer it a couple of times, and then one of the coaching questions is, and what else? And what else, to get them to keep exploring it. And then people go, I don't know what it is you want me to say. And I'm like, I don't even have an answer. What I want to do is I want to make sure that you have explored all of the answers, because the coaching ethos is that you've got the answers. They're all there. We're just helping you to explore them and find them. But I don't know what you want me to say. And it's like, I don't have an answer here. I'm just helping you to
all I'm saying is that when I ask a question and you say, I don't know really, that's not a good enough answer. I'm going to probe a little bit further than that. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And you don't just want the questions that are here that they're used to answering. You want the questions that are back here that they haven't had to think about for a little while. So coaching's great, isn't it?
Oh yeah, so much fun.
I love it. And it's so great to always, I think I've had a couple of coaches on these, and it's always great to, although you might have different clientele, that actually there's so many things that we have in common in terms of approaches and things like that. Fab conversation, fab questions. And yeah, we're a little bit over 45 minutes, but that doesn't trouble me, because I think there's plenty in there that's going to be useful to people. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And we've put your details in, so go and check Charlie out. He is on Instagram. I've put the details of his link tree in so that you can get easy access to all of that information. But definitely give him a follow on the socials, because there's lots of information there that's really useful. And if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat, and either I will answer them or I'll tag Charlie in and Charlie will answer them too. But thank you so much. It's been really great chatting to you. And thank you for listening. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you very soon.